Richard Clark had everything: power, wealth, control. He moved through life like a man untouchable, his world built on precision and logic. But on one bitter winter night, as he walked toward his car, a fragile voice stopped him in his tracks. "Sir, please, can I warm up?" He turned and saw her, a little girl, no older than 7, standing alone in the snow. Blonde hair tangled from the wind, blue eyes wide with quiet desperation, a worn-out teddy bear clutched tightly in her arms. She was freezing. She was alone. And though he didn't know it yet, she was his. The bitter winter wind cut through the city streets as Richard Clark stepped out of his office building, pulling his coat tighter around him. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the dark sky, covering the sidewalks in a thin layer of white. His polished black shoes left crisp imprints on the pavement as he made his way toward his car, parked just a short walk away. It had been another long day, filled with back-to-back meetings, negotiations, and the kind of high-stakes decisions that had made him one of the most powerful CEOs in the country. He was used to this life, one of control, precision, and unshakable authority. He had worked too hard to let emotions or distractions get in his way. Everything in his world was calculated, every move planned with purpose. He barely registered the cold as he strode forward, his mind already on the next day's agenda. That was until he heard something, so faint it almost got lost in the wind. "Sir." It was a small, fragile voice. He might have ignored it, might have assumed it wasn't meant for him, but something about the way it trembled in the cold air made him stop. He turned his head and saw her. A little girl, no older than 7, stood near the edge of the sidewalk, half buried in a snowbank. Her blonde hair, tangled and windblown, framed a face that was pale with cold. She wore a thin, oversized coat that did nothing to protect her from the harsh winter night. Clutched in her small hands was a worn-out stuffed teddy bear, its fur matted from years of love and wear. Her blue eyes, striking and eerily familiar, looked up at him with desperation. "Please," she whispered. "Can I warm up?" Richard felt something unfamiliar twist in his chest. He wasn't the type of man to stop for strangers, let alone a child. The city was full of scams, and he had no intention of being drawn into something he couldn't control. But she was trembling, her breath coming out in small, visible puffs of air. The snow clung to her clothes, soaking into the fabric. And those eyes. There was something about them that made it impossible for him to turn away. "Where are your parents?" he asked, his voice steadier than he felt. For a brief second, she looked down at her teddy bear, gripping it tighter. Then she lifted her gaze again, and he saw the tears welling up in her eyes. "My mom is gone," she murmured. Richard's breath caught in his throat. The way she said it, soft, final, sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the weather. The street around them was nearly empty. The office buildings had long since closed, their employees gone home to their families. There was no one else. No mother searching for her lost child, no frantic adult calling out a name. Just this small girl, standing alone in the cold, looking up at him with quiet desperation. Richard exhaled slowly. He could walk away. That would be the simplest choice. He had no connection to this child, no reason to get involved. But something inside him, something he couldn't explain, told him that if he left her here, he would regret it for the rest of his life. "Come with me," he said, surprising even himself. The little girl hesitated, then nodded. And as he led her toward his car, Richard Clark had no idea that his entire life was about to change forever. The drive through the snow-covered streets was silent except for the rhythmic hum of the car's engine. Richard kept glancing in the rearview mirror, watching the little girl curled up in the back seat. She held her teddy bear close to her chest, her small fingers gripping the worn fabric tightly, as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. She was still shivering, though the heat from the car had already begun to warm the cabin. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, and her blonde hair was damp with melting snow. She didn't speak, didn't ask where they were going. She simply sat there, quiet, watchful. Richard wasn't used to silence. His world was filled with the constant noise of business, phone calls, board meetings, financial reports. Yet, in this moment, the quiet felt heavier than anything he had experienced before. He had acted on impulse, something he rarely did. Picking up a stray child off the street wasn't exactly in his nature. But something about her had stopped him from walking away. "What's your name?" he asked, breaking the silence. She hesitated before answering. "Lily." It was a delicate name, simple but full of life. He nodded, letting the information settle in his mind. "How long were you out there, Lily?" She shifted slightly in her seat, hugging the teddy bear tighter. "Since this morning," she murmured. Richard tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Morning. That meant she had been in the cold for hours, wandering the city, alone. He glanced at her again, trying to ignore the uncomfortable feeling that was beginning to settle in his chest. "Where were you before that?" he asked carefully. Lily hesitated, staring down at the bear in her lap. "My aunt's house," she finally admitted. "But she told me I couldn't stay anymore." Richard exhaled slowly, a strange mix of anger and disbelief washing over him. "She kicked you out." Lily gave a small nod but didn't look up. He felt his pulse quicken. He had seen ruthless people in business, had dealt with those who would do anything for power or money. But this, abandoning a child in the middle of winter, was a level of cruelty he couldn't comprehend. "Did she say why?" he asked, keeping his voice calm despite the frustration simmering beneath the surface. Lily shrugged, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the seams of her bear. "She said she didn't have enough money. That she couldn't take care of me anymore." Richard's jaw tightened. He had grown up believing that money could solve any problem. It was the currency of power, the answer to control. But hearing that a child had been discarded like an inconvenience because of something as trivial as finances made his stomach turn. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. "What about your father?" he asked, though something in his gut already told him the answer. Lily shook her head. "I don't have one," she said simply. Richard didn't know why, but those words made something inside him twist painfully. He didn't push her for more details. Instead, he turned his attention back to the road, guiding the car toward his penthouse. He hadn't planned this, hadn't thought through what he was going to do next. But one thing was certain, he wasn't going to leave her out in the cold. As they pulled into the underground parking garage of his building, Lily finally lifted her head, her blue eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. Richard parked the car and turned toward her. "You're going to stay here tonight," he said. "Somewhere warm. Somewhere safe." She didn't react right away, just looked at him with an unreadable expression. "Okay," she said softly. It was a small word, but it carried so much weight. Richard got out of the car, walked around to open her door, and extended his hand. For a moment, she hesitated, staring at it as if unsure whether to trust him. Then, slowly, she reached out and placed her small hand in his. Her fingers were still cold, but her grip was strong. And as he led her inside, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that he had just stepped into something far bigger than he had ever anticipated. The elevator ride to the top floor was quiet. Lily stood beside Richard, still clutching her teddy bear tightly. Her small fingers gripped the fabric as though letting go would somehow make everything disappear. She didn't fidget, didn't ask questions, just watched the illuminated numbers change as they ascended higher and higher. Richard wasn't sure what he expected from her. A child her age should have been frightened, overwhelmed by the sudden shift from the cold streets to the warm, sleek interior of a luxury high-rise. But Lily didn't seem scared, she seemed cautious, as if she had already learned that life was unpredictable, that nothing was permanent. When the elevator doors opened, Richard led her down a long, modern hallway lined with dark marble and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The space was pristine, cold in a way that reflected the kind of life he lived, one built on efficiency, not comfort. He opened the door to his penthouse, stepping aside to let Lily walk in first. She hesitated for just a second before crossing the threshold. The living room was expansive, with towering windows that revealed the glittering skyline. The furniture was sleek, expensive, but not exactly welcoming. The space was designed for meetings, for quiet evenings spent alone, not for a child. Lily took a few steps forward, her eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. She didn't say anything, just took it all in. Richard watched her carefully. "You can stay here for now," he said, slipping off his coat. "I'll figure out what to do in the morning." She turned to look at him, tilting her head slightly. "What do you mean?" He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I need to find out where you're supposed to be. If there's anyone who can take care of you." There was no reaction at first. Then, Lily lowered her gaze, gripping the teddy bear even tighter. "I don't have anywhere to go," she said quietly. Richard felt something clench in his chest. He should have known she would say that. For years, he had believed that emotions were a distraction, that the best way to move forward in life was to avoid anything that made him vulnerable. He had walked away from attachments, from relationships that asked too much of him. Yet now, standing in his own home with a 7-year-old child who had nowhere else to go, he felt the undeniable weight of responsibility settle over him. "You're hungry," he said, not bothering to phrase it as a question. Lily hesitated, then gave a small nod. Richard turned toward the kitchen, realizing how unprepared he was for this. His fridge was stocked, but only with things he could eat quickly between meetings: pre-packaged meals, protein shakes, imported coffee. He had never had a reason to buy anything meant for a child. Still, he pulled out what he could find: a carton of eggs, a loaf of bread, some cheese. He wasn't much of a cook, but he could manage something simple. Lily climbed onto one of the stools at the kitchen island, watching him curiously as he cracked eggs into a pan. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. "You live here alone?" she asked after a while. Richard glanced at her, surprised by the question. "Yeah." Lily rested her chin on the head of her teddy bear. "It's big." He smirked slightly. "It's supposed to be." She seemed to consider that for a moment before looking around again. "My mom used to say big houses get lonely." Richard's grip on the spatula tightened slightly. He didn't respond right away. He had spent most of his life convinced that loneliness was just another price of success, something unavoidable when you dedicated yourself to work the way he did. But hearing those words from a child, especially this child, made them feel different, heavier. When the food was ready, he set a plate in front of her. Scrambled eggs and toast. Simple, but warm. Lily picked up the fork and took a small bite. After chewing thoughtfully for a moment, she nodded. "It's good." Richard let out a quiet chuckle. "You don't have to lie." She shrugged, taking another bite. "It's better than cereal." They ate in silence for a while, the quiet between them feeling almost normal. It wasn't until Lily finished her meal that she spoke again. "My mom made the best pancakes," she said softly, her fingers running over the edge of the plate. Richard looked at her carefully. He could see it now, the hesitation, the way she was testing how much she could say. "Tell me about her," he said, his voice quieter than before. Lily hesitated for a long moment before finally answering. "She was kind," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She always smelled like vanilla. And she sang when she cooked." Richard's chest tightened. He didn't have to ask her mother's name. He already knew. Anna. The woman he had once loved. The woman he had left behind. The realization hit him with the force of a storm. He looked at Lily, at her bright blue eyes, his eyes. He had spent his life believing he was free of the past, that he had moved on without regret. But now, sitting across from this child, the truth was undeniable. He hadn't just left Anna behind. He had left his daughter. Richard sat frozen in his chair, his mind struggling to catch up with the reality that had just unfolded before him. The pieces of the puzzle had been there all along, the familiarity in Lily's eyes, the way her features reminded him of someone he hadn't seen in years, the quiet ache in his chest when she mentioned her mother. And now, there was no denying it. She was his daughter. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. He had spent years convincing himself that his past didn't matter, that the choices he made had been necessary sacrifices on his path to success. But now, sitting across from a child who had spent her life believing she had no father, that illusion shattered completely. Lily continued to play with the edge of her plate, unaware of the storm raging inside him. "She used to talk about you sometimes," she said softly. "Not a lot. But when I asked about my dad, she would say you were really busy. That you had important things to do." Richard's chest tightened. He could picture it now, Anna, sitting with their daughter, carefully choosing her words so that Lily wouldn't grow up hating a man she had never met. "She never told me," he finally said, his voice rougher than he intended. Lily looked up at him, her brows furrowing slightly. "She didn't?" He shook his head. "I didn't know you existed, Lily." If I had, he stopped himself. What was he supposed to say? That he would have stayed? That he would have been a good father? That he wouldn't have walked away? He didn't know if that was true. Lily studied him for a long moment before glancing down at her teddy bear. "She must have been scared," she murmured. Richard frowned. "Scared of what?" Lily's small fingers traced the fabric of the stuffed bear. "That maybe you wouldn't want me." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He inhaled sharply, forcing himself to stay composed. "That's not true," he said, his voice firm. "I didn't know, Lily. But if I had, I would have." He stopped again, because the truth was, he wasn't sure what he would have done. Back then, he had been consumed by ambition, too focused on building his empire to think about love or family. He had convinced himself that emotions were weaknesses, that ties to people only slowed him down. But now, looking at his daughter, abandoned and lost in a world that had already been cruel to her, he felt something shift inside him. "I wouldn't have left," he finished, though the words felt heavier than he expected. Lily looked at him carefully, as if trying to decide whether or not to believe him. Then she gave a small nod and hugged her teddy bear tighter. Silence settled between them, thick with unspoken thoughts. Richard rubbed a hand over his face, exhaling slowly. His life had changed in the span of a single night, and for the first time in years, he didn't know what came next. But there was one thing he did know: he couldn't let her go back to the life she had come from. "You should get some rest," he said finally, standing up from the table. "There's a guest room down the hall. You can sleep there." Lily hesitated, her gaze flickering toward the large, unfamiliar space around her. Then she nodded and slid off the chair. Richard led her to the guest room, pushing open the door to reveal a neatly arranged space with a large bed and soft lighting. It was impersonal, like the rest of his home, but at least it was warm. Lily stepped inside, glancing around before turning back to him. "Thank you," she said quietly. Richard hesitated before answering. "You don't have to thank me." She gave him a small, tired smile, then walked over to the bed and climbed under the covers, still holding on to her teddy bear. Richard lingered in the doorway for a moment longer before finally turning off the light and stepping out into the hallway. As he closed the door behind him, he leaned against the wall, pressing his fingers to his temples. His daughter was sleeping in the next room. And he had no idea what to do next. Richard barely slept that night. He had spent years building a life where every decision was calculated, every outcome predictable. But nothing in his world had prepared him for this. His daughter, the child he never knew existed, was asleep in the next room. A little girl who had been abandoned by the only family she had left. A little girl who had spent the night in the freezing cold because she had nowhere else to go. And she was his. Richard sat in his office, staring out at the dark city skyline, his mind racing with questions. How could Anna have kept this from him? Had she really believed he wouldn't have wanted to know? Would he have reacted any differently back then if she had told him? Deep down, he knew the answer to that. The man he had been 7 years ago wasn't ready to be a father. Back then, he had been so consumed by his ambition that nothing else had mattered. He had walked away from Anna because he had convinced himself that relationships only held people back. But now, looking back, he realized just how much he had lost. As the first light of dawn crept over the city, Richard finally pushed himself up from his chair. He needed to figure out what came next. He made his way to the guest room, pausing in the doorway. The soft morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the bed. Lily was still asleep, curled up under the covers with her teddy bear tucked beneath her chin. For a moment, Richard just stood there, watching her. She looked so small, so fragile. And yet, she had survived more in 7 years than most people did in a lifetime. He wasn't sure what woke her, but after a few moments, her eyelids fluttered open. She blinked sleepily, her blue eyes hazy with drowsiness before they landed on him. Richard cleared his throat. Morning. Lily rubbed her eyes, shifting slightly under the blanket. Morning, she mumbled. Are you hungry? She nodded, sitting up slowly. Richard hesitated. He had never taken care of a child before. He wasn't even sure what 7-year-olds liked to eat. But then he remembered what she had said the night before. My mom made the best pancakes. That, at least, he could do. Come on, he said. Let's make breakfast. Lily slid off the bed, still clutching her teddy bear as she followed him to the kitchen. She was quiet, her small feet barely making a sound against the floor. Richard found the ingredients easily enough: flour, eggs, milk, sugar. He wasn't much of a cook, but pancakes were simple. As he measured out the ingredients, he felt Lily watching him closely. You know how to cook? She asked, sounding genuinely surprised. Richard smirked. I can follow a recipe. Lily climbed onto one of the stools, resting her chin on her hands. Mom never used a recipe, she said. She just knew. Richard swallowed hard, stirring the batter. He could picture it, their home, the way Anna must have stood in the kitchen, humming softly as she cooked. It was a life he had never been part of. A life he had never even known existed. Lily watched him work, her blue eyes studying him with quiet curiosity. After a while, she spoke again. Are you really my dad? Richard froze for half a second before carefully setting the spoon down. He turned to face her, meeting her gaze directly. Yes, he said. I am. Lily didn't look shocked or upset. She just nodded, as if she had already known but needed to hear it from him. Do dads usually make pancakes? She asked. Richard let out a quiet chuckle. I have no idea. Lily considered that for a moment, then shrugged. Well, I think it's a good start. Something warm spread through Richard's chest. He had spent his entire life chasing things that he thought mattered: money, power, control. But in that moment, standing in the kitchen with his daughter watching him make pancakes, he realized that nothing had ever felt as important as this. He flipped the pancakes onto a plate and set them in front of her. Tell me if they're as good as your mom's. Lily took a bite, chewing thoughtfully before nodding. They're okay, she said. Not as good as hers. But close. Richard laughed. I'll take it. They ate in comfortable silence, the tension between them easing slightly. When Lily finished, she set her fork down and looked up at him. What happens now? It was the same question she had asked the night before. And this time, Richard had an answer. You stay here, he said. With me. Lily tilted her head. For how long? Richard met her gaze, his voice steady. As long as you need. Lily studied him for a long moment before finally nodding. Okay. And with that single word, Richard knew, his life had just changed forever. Richard wasn't sure how long it would take for life to feel normal again, but he knew one thing for certain, everything had changed. Lily stayed. The first few days were filled with quiet adjustments. She didn't ask for much, didn't make demands, didn't even seem entirely sure what to do with herself in such a large, empty home. She spent most of her time exploring the apartment, trailing her fingers along the sleek countertops, staring out at the city through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. She never strayed too far from her teddy bear, and she always watched Richard with quiet curiosity, as if trying to figure him out. Richard, for his part, wasn't sure how to navigate any of it. His world had always been structured, driven by routine and efficiency. But now, there was a child in his home, his child, and he had no idea how to take care of her. He learned quickly that 7-year-olds had habits, little quirks that he had never thought about before. Lily hated socks and kicked them off at every opportunity. She hummed absent-mindedly when she was focused on something, whether it was drawing at the kitchen table or watching cartoons in the living room. She ate her pancakes in a very particular way, edges first, then the middle, saving the last bite like it was a reward. And she asked questions. Lots of them. Some were simple. Do you always work this much, or why is your fridge so empty? But then there were others, the kind that made Richard pause, made him wonder if he was equipped to handle this new reality. Why didn't my mom tell you about me? Richard had no answer to that. It wasn't until the 4th night that something shifted. He had been in his office, trying to focus on work, but his mind kept wandering back to Lily. She had gone to bed an hour ago, but something about the apartment felt different now, less empty, yet more fragile. He wasn't used to having someone else here, to knowing that there was a small person down the hall who depended on him in ways he still didn't fully understand. He sighed, shutting his laptop. As he stood and stretched, he heard it, soft footsteps in the hallway. When he stepped out of his office, he found Lily standing just outside her bedroom, hugging her teddy bear tightly to her chest. Lily, he said, keeping his voice low. She hesitated, then shifted her weight from one foot to the other. I had a bad dream. Richard wasn't sure what the right response was. He had never comforted a child before, never dealt with nightmares or fears that couldn't be solved with logic and reason. But as he looked at her, standing there in her too big pajamas, her blonde hair slightly messy from sleep, he knew he couldn't just send her back to bed. He walked over and knelt down so they were eye level. Do you want to talk about it? Lily shrugged. It was about Mom. Richard felt something heavy settle in his chest. Do you miss her? He asked quietly. Lily nodded, tightening her grip on the bear. Sometimes I forget she's gone. I think she's just in the other room, and then I remember, and it feels like my whole body hurts. Richard exhaled slowly. I know that feeling. Lily looked up at him. Do you miss her too? It was the first time she had asked him that, the first time she had acknowledged that her mother wasn't just her loss, but his too. Richard nodded. Yeah, he admitted. I do. Lily studied him for a moment before she spoke again. Did you love her? The question caught him off guard, not because he hadn't thought about it, but because he hadn't expected her to ask it so plainly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he sat down on the floor, resting his arms on his knees. Your mom was the best person I ever knew, he said finally. She was kind. She was strong. And she believed in people in a way I never could. Lily watched him carefully, her blue eyes so much like his own. Then why did you leave? Richard swallowed hard. It was a fair question, one he had been asking himself for days now. Because I was stupid, he admitted. I thought work was the most important thing in my life. I thought I had to prove something to the world, and I didn't see what I was giving up. Lily was quiet for a long time. Then she shifted, stepping forward just enough to close the space between them. Before Richard could process what was happening, she climbed into his lap, curling up like it was the most natural thing in the world. He froze, his whole body tensing. But then, slowly, carefully, he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "You're not gonna leave now, right?" she asked, her voice muffled against his chest. Richard tightened his grip just a little. "No," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." Lily let out a small sigh, her body relaxing. It was the first time since she had arrived that she let herself trust him completely. And for the first time in his life, Richard realized that success, power, and money meant nothing if he didn't have something real to hold on to. The following morning, Richard woke up feeling more exhausted than usual, but there was a strange sense of peace in the air, something he couldn't quite explain. He had spent the night on the couch, with Lily curled up beside him, her small body pressed against his as she slept. He wasn't sure when it had happened, but at some point, she had dozed off in his arms, and instead of carrying her back to her room, he had simply stayed there, holding her. Now, as the sunlight filtered through the massive windows, he carefully shifted, trying not to wake her. She stirred slightly, mumbling something in her sleep before clutching her teddy bear tighter. Richard sat up, running a hand through his hair, feeling a weight in his chest that had nothing to do with exhaustion. He had spent years believing he was untouchable, that nothing could pull him away from the life he had built for himself. But this little girl had walked into his world and, in less than a week, shattered everything he thought he knew. As he stood up, careful not to wake her, his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. He picked it up and frowned when he saw the name on the screen, *** David Calloway ***, his attorney. Richard exhaled before stepping into his office and shutting the door behind him. "David," he greeted, keeping his voice low. "What do you have for me?" "I pulled all the records I could find on Lily's mother, Anna Williams," David said. "Her death was officially recorded 2 weeks ago. Cause of death was complications from an illness, cancer, from what I gathered. She was in and out of the hospital for almost a year before she passed." Richard swallowed hard, forcing himself to stay composed. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed sent a sharp ache through his chest. "And the aunt?" he asked. David sighed. "Not a great situation. Claire Williams, Anna's younger sister. She had legal guardianship of Lily after Anna passed, but from what I can tell, she barely kept the kid for a week before deciding she couldn't handle it. No official paperwork, no attempt to turn custody over to the state. She just threw her out." Richard clenched his jaw. The idea of anyone abandoning a child, let alone their own niece, made his blood boil. "Where is she now?" "Disappeared," David said. "No job on record, no fixed address. My guess? She was looking for a way to dump the responsibility from the start." Richard exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. "So legally, Lily has no one." "No one but you," David said carefully. "Which brings me to the next part. What do you want to do, Richard? If you want, I can start the process of placing her into the system, finding a foster home." "No," Richard cut in before he could even think about it. "She's not going anywhere." David hesitated. "Are you sure? This is a major responsibility. You're talking about raising a child, Richard. This isn't business. This is life." "I know what it is," Richard said firmly. For the first time in his life, he knew exactly what he needed to do. "Then I'll get started on the paperwork," David said. "You'll need to establish guardianship first, but with the DNA confirmation and the fact that she has no other legal family, it should be straightforward. It'll take some time, but I don't care how long it takes, Richard said. Just do it. There was a brief silence on the other end before David let out a short laugh. Never thought I'd see the day. The great Richard Clark, a father. Richard didn't bother responding. He ended the call and set the phone down, running a hand over his face. He had made his decision. Now, he just had to figure out how to make it work. When he stepped back into the living room, Lily was awake, sitting up on the couch, rubbing her eyes sleepily. "Morning," she mumbled, looking up at him. "Morning," Richard said, walking over. "I need to talk to you about something." Lily blinked, her fingers still gripping the teddy bear. "Okay." Richard sat down beside her, turning to face her fully. "I talked to my lawyer this morning," he said, keeping his tone steady. "About what happened to your mom. About your aunt." Lily stiffened slightly but didn't say anything. "You don't have anyone else, Lily," he continued. "Legally, you don't have a guardian anymore." She looked down, her grip on the teddy bear tightening. "I know." Richard took a deep breath. "I want to change that." Lily looked up, her blue eyes filled with something he couldn't quite name. "I want you to stay here," he said. "For good." She didn't react right away. She just stared at him, as if waiting for him to take the words back, as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. "You mean, you want to keep me?" she asked hesitantly. Richard's chest ached at the way she said it, as if she expected him to say no. "Yeah," he said softly. "I want to keep you." Lily stared at him for a long moment before finally speaking. "Okay." It was just one word, but it was enough. And for the first time in his life, Richard Clark knew he had made the right choice. The following weeks were unlike anything Richard had ever experienced. His life, once structured and predictable, had become something entirely different. There were no more quiet evenings spent reviewing business reports, no more early mornings where the only sound in his penthouse was the hum of his coffee machine. Now, his mornings started with the soft patter of small feet on the marble floors, with sleepy voices asking for pancakes, and with the ever-present sight of a worn-out teddy bear tucked under a little girl's arm. Lily was still adjusting, and so was he. There were things he never thought about before: what time a child should go to bed, what kind of clothes she needed, what food she liked. It became clear quickly that she had never been given much choice before. The first time he took her shopping for clothes, she had stood in the store, staring at the racks of colorful dresses and sweaters, overwhelmed by the idea that she could actually choose something for herself. "You don't have to pick just one," Richard had told her when he noticed how hesitant she was. Lily had looked up at him with wide eyes. "I can have more than one." Richard's chest had tightened at that. "You can have as many as you want." She had only chosen 3 things: a simple blue sweater, a pair of jeans, and a soft nightgown covered in stars. When he told her she could get more, she shook her head. "I don't need more," she had said simply, as if the idea of excess was completely foreign to her. It was in that moment that Richard realized just how little she had before. Each day, Lily became more comfortable in his home, but there were still moments where he could see the doubt in her eyes. As if she was waiting for something to go wrong, for this new life to suddenly disappear the way her old one had. One night, he found her sitting in the living room, staring at the city skyline. It was late, past the bedtime he had set for her, but she was wide awake, hugging her teddy bear. "You should be asleep," he said as he approached. Lily turned to look at him, then back at the window. "I like looking at the lights," she said. "Mom used to say they looked like stars when we couldn't see the real ones." Richard sat down beside her. "She was right," he said, watching the way the city glowed beneath them. Lily was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice softer this time. "Do you think she would be okay with this?" Richard turned to look at her. "With what?" "With me staying here." "With you?" His throat tightened. He had wondered that himself 100 times since Lily had come into his life. He had walked away from Anna all those years ago, left her to raise a child on her own. He would never forgive himself for that. But Lily was here now. And he wouldn't fail her the way he had failed Anna. "I think," he said carefully, "that she would want you to be safe. To be happy." Lily studied his face, as if trying to tell whether he really meant it. "Are you going to keep me forever?" she asked, her voice almost too quiet to hear. Richard's chest ached at the question. "Yeah," he said. "Forever." Lily nodded, as if that answer was enough. She leaned her head against his arm, letting out a small sigh. For the first time since she had come into his life, Richard felt something settle inside him. This wasn't just temporary. She wasn't just a child in need of a home. She was his daughter. And he was never letting her go. This story is about more than just an unexpected reunion between a millionaire and his lost daughter. It's a story of redemption, responsibility, and the realization that success means nothing if you have no one to share it with. Richard Clarke starts as a man who believes he has everything, only to discover that he has unknowingly lost something far more valuable than power or wealth, a family he never knew existed. His journey is not just about providing Lily with a home, but about earning her trust, proving that he is not the same man who once walked away from love and responsibility. Lily, on the other hand, is a child who has already seen too much of life's cruelty. Abandoned, left to fend for herself, she has every reason to be wary, to believe that nothing lasts. Yet, despite everything, she is open to the possibility of love, of belonging. Her quiet resilience is what ultimately changes Richard, not through force, but through the simple, undeniable truth that she is his, and she deserves to be loved. The ending is not about perfection, it's about transformation. Richard does not magically become the perfect father overnight, nor does Lily instantly forget the pain of her past. But they choose each other. They choose to move forward, to heal, to build something real. And that is what makes this story powerful. It's not about a billionaire finding his lost daughter, it's about a father realizing that she was the one thing missing from his life all along. The last person Aidan Rivers expected to see in a quiet family restaurant was the woman who vanished from his life 3 years ago, let alone sitting at a table with 3 little boys who all shared his eyes, his hair, and his face. One look at them, and everything he thought he knew about his past, and his future, began to unravel. Aidan Rivers wasn't the kind of man who ended up in the wrong place. Every minute of his day was scheduled, monitored, and optimized by a team of assistants who knew better than to improvise. But that afternoon, his driver had taken a wrong exit off the freeway due to a last-minute traffic reroute, and instead of arriving at a high-profile dinner meeting at a luxury hotel downtown, Aidan found himself standing outside a small, tucked-away Italian restaurant that looked like it hadn't been renovated in at least 2 decades. He was ready to leave, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the flickering sign in the window, maybe the scent of garlic bread wafting through the air, or maybe, though he'd never admit it, the weight of exhaustion he hadn't let himself feel in years. He told the driver to wait and walked inside alone. The restaurant was warm and noisy, a family-run place with mismatched tablecloths, candles that had burned halfway down, and children's laughter bouncing off the walls. He chose a seat by the window, pulled out his phone, and planned to reply to a few emails before heading back out. The atmosphere was not his style. It was too alive. Too messy. But still, something about it made him pause. He was halfway through typing a message when he heard a sudden burst of giggling from behind him. He looked up instinctively, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on a table near the center. That's when he saw her. Scarlett. It took him a second to process it. She was older now, slightly, but still unmistakably her. The same thick dark hair, now pulled into a loose braid, the same graceful movements, the way she tilted her head when she listened to someone speak. And then he saw what surrounded her, 3 small boys, all with dark brown hair and shockingly bright blue eyes. One was trying to balance a breadstick on his nose. Another was playing with a crayon. The third was talking so fast she was struggling to keep up. Aiden felt his heart hit the floor. He watched, unable to look away, as one of the boys looked up and laughed. And it was his laugh. His exact laugh. The same one his mother used to point out when he was a child. His breath caught in his throat, and he leaned forward slightly, squinting, trying to convince himself that this wasn't what it so clearly looked like. But it was. He could see it in the shape of their faces. In the set of their jaws. In their eyes, mirrors of his own. They weren't just any children. They were his. The shock was so deep it silenced everything else inside him. All the anger he'd once felt toward her, all the unanswered questions, the way she had disappeared from his life 3 years ago without a single explanation, it all came crashing back, but now it was tangled with something far more powerful. Disbelief. And something dangerously close to grief. Scarlett hadn't seen him yet. She was helping one of the boys cut a meatball in half, her expression soft and patient, completely unaware of the storm unraveling just feet away. He couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't believe that the woman he had once imagined building a future with was sitting just across the room, surrounded by a future that had clearly happened without him. And in that moment, Aiden Rivers, CEO, billionaire, untouchable, felt something he hadn't felt in years. Powerless. Aiden sat frozen, his pulse pounding in his ears, as a million thoughts collided and collapsed inside his mind. He kept staring at Scarlett and the 3 boys with a kind of stunned detachment, like his brain hadn't caught up to what his eyes already knew. For a man who lived in absolutes, in numbers and control and certainty, the sight in front of him cracked something in the very foundation of his being. They looked like him. All 3 of them. Same dark hair, same piercing blue eyes, same subtle expressions that he recognized in himself when he looked in the mirror. There was no denying it. These weren't just any children, they were his sons. And she had never told him. He watched as Scarlett wiped one boy's mouth with a napkin and gently scolded another for trying to climb under the table. She looked tired, but not worn down. There was a quiet strength to her, the kind he remembered. The kind that had both drawn him in and pushed him away back then. He tried to connect the version of her he saw now with the memory of the woman who had walked away from his life 3 years ago without a word of explanation. She had simply disappeared. One day they were laughing on his balcony, sharing takeout and talking about ridiculous baby names for a future they joked about. The next, she was gone. No note. No goodbye. Just silence. He had searched for her. Hired private investigators. Pulled strings. Made calls. Her apartment was empty, phone disconnected, bank accounts closed. It was like she had vanished off the grid. It had destroyed something in him, something vulnerable, hopeful, human. After that, he buried himself in work. He grew the company, made his first 100 million, bought a penthouse, built a brand so powerful no one dared to ask about the past. But the truth was, he'd never stopped wondering what happened to her. And now he knew. She hadn't just left. She had taken his children with her. His instinct was to storm over, demand answers, raise his voice. But something held him back. Maybe it was the way one of the boys reached for her hand and she squeezed it instinctively. Maybe it was the ease with which she navigated their chaos. Or maybe it was the strange, unfamiliar ache spreading in his chest, the weight of lost time. Finally, as if sensing the intensity of his stare, she turned her head and saw him. Their eyes locked. And the moment their gazes met, the entire room seemed to still. Her body tensed instantly. Her eyes widened. For a split second, she looked like someone seeing a ghost. Her lips parted like she might say something, but no words came. He stood slowly. Her eyes followed him as he walked toward her table. The boys didn't notice him at first, they were too busy fighting over crayons. But Scarlett didn't move. Didn't breathe. He stopped a few feet away. Scarlett. Her name fell from his mouth like a stone. Heavy. Real. The sound of it made her flinch, just slightly. Aiden, she whispered. Her voice was different. Still soft, but layered now with exhaustion and something else, guilt. He looked at the boys. They were still too distracted to realize what was unfolding. But Aiden couldn't take his eyes off them. He pointed subtly. There. She nodded. No lies. No hesitation. Yes. All the breath left his body. The truth was right there. Undeniable. I think we should talk, he said, barely keeping his voice steady. Scarlett glanced down at the boys, then back at him. Her shoulders straightened like she was bracing herself for impact. Yeah, she said quietly. We should. Scarlett stepped outside first, her movements cautious, careful, as if each step carried a different weight now that her secret was no longer hers alone. Aiden followed, his mind spiraling, his thoughts loud and unfiltered in the silence between them. The restaurant door shut behind them, muting the warmth and laughter of the families inside. Outside, the air felt sharper. Heavy. Real in a way that made it difficult to breathe. They stood near the edge of the sidewalk, just out of view from the restaurant windows. Scarlett crossed her arms tightly over her chest, her back straight, chin slightly raised like someone preparing for a fight they knew they couldn't win but had to endure anyway. Aiden, on the other hand, didn't speak right away. He simply looked at her. At her face, her eyes, the same ones he used to memorize when the world felt too complicated. She looked older. Not in a bad way, more grounded. But there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. A sadness. Or maybe just years of survival. He didn't ask the obvious questions. Not yet. The truth was too raw, too exposed. So he started somewhere softer, even though it still burned in his throat. Why didn't you tell me? Scarlett blinked, once, slowly. Because I was terrified, she said. Of you. Of your world. Of how fast everything was moving when I found out. He clenched his jaw, trying not to let the anger rise so quickly. Terrified of what, exactly? That I wouldn't want them. No, she said quickly. I knew you would. I knew you'd be there, and you'd take responsibility, and you'd turn your life upside down if you had to. That's what scared me the most. That caught him off guard. So, you left because you thought I'd care too much? Scarlett exhaled. I left because I didn't know how to survive being consumed by you and your life. I knew what would happen. Headlines. Cameras. Contracts. Negotiations. They'd grow up under a microscope, and I couldn't do that to them. Or to you. You were on the edge of something huge, Aiden. I watched you climb so far so fast, and I didn't want to be the weight that slowed you down. He shook his head slowly, trying to absorb it all. You were never weight. You were the one part of my life that didn't feel manufactured. And you didn't even give me the chance to choose. Her expression broke slightly, the corners of her mouth pulling tight. I didn't want to be your burden. I wanted to protect them. And maybe, yes, maybe I wanted to protect myself too. He paced once, then turned back to her, eyes burning. You protected them by keeping them from their father. I protected them from becoming a story, she snapped, her voice rising. From being bought and sold by tabloids. From being used as leverage by people who only care about your company. You don't think I thought about what I was doing every day for the last 3 years? A long silence followed. Neither of them looked away. It was a kind of quiet that only came from two people who had once known every detail about each other and now couldn't recognize the parts that had changed. Finally, Aiden's voice softened. You don't have to justify what you did, Scarlett. Not right now. But I need to know one thing. She waited, shoulders tight. Do they know who I am? She swallowed hard. They know they have a dad. A good man. Someone I wasn't ready to bring into their world until I was sure they were ready too. Aiden nodded slowly. There was pain in his eyes, but also something else, resolve. Well, he said quietly, I'm here now. And I'm not going anywhere. Scarlett didn't answer, but something shifted in her face. A flicker of disbelief, maybe even hope. She turned slightly, glancing through the window toward the table where the boys still sat, completely unaware that the axis of their world had just begun to shift. When she looked back at him, her voice was barely a whisper. I don't know how to let you in, Aiden. Then let me figure it out with you, he said. And for the first time since she'd walked away from him, she didn't run. The next morning, Aiden couldn't focus on anything. His phone buzzed with meeting reminders, emails stacked up unanswered, and his assistant knocked twice to ask if he'd be joining the board call, but he ignored them all. His thoughts were still outside that little restaurant, still standing on the sidewalk across from Scarlett, still locked in the silence that followed the truth. For a man who made decisions in seconds, who negotiated billion-dollar deals before breakfast, he now found himself caught in hesitation, unsure of how to take even the next step. He didn't know what the rules were anymore. He had children. 3 boys. His sons. And he'd missed everything, their first steps, first words, first birthdays. All of it gone, tucked into years he couldn't get back. The thought hollowed him in a way that scared him. Not because he felt guilt, but because he realized how much he wanted something he had never imagined before. He didn't just want to meet them. He wanted to know them. To belong to them in a way that had nothing to do with money or legacy or name. By early afternoon, he was back in his car, parked a block away from Scarlett's modest apartment building. It wasn't in a bad area, but it was clear she had chosen simplicity, privacy, safety. He hadn't told her he was coming. Part of him knew she might not open the door, but he needed to see them again. Even from a distance. When he saw her stepping outside with the boys bundled in light jackets, his breath caught. They were all holding hands, barely organized chaos, chattering over one another, pointing at birds, leaves, the sky. Scarlett spotted him immediately. She didn't look surprised. She hesitated, then walked toward him, her pace slow and deliberate. The boys followed like ducklings, 2 tugging at her arms and the 3rd lagging behind, distracted by a stick he'd found. We're going to the park, she said when she reached him. Her voice was neutral but not cold. You can walk with us, if you want. He nodded, trying to hold back the gratitude that surged in his chest. I'd like that. They walked together in awkward silence at first. The boys ran ahead, chasing each other. Aiden watched them like someone watching magic unfold. Every movement they made felt surreal to him. He had missed so much. Eventually, one of the boys, the smallest, fell. Scarlett started forward, but Aiden was faster. He knelt down, gently checking the boy's hands for scrapes. Hey, Aiden said softly, brushing off the dirt. You okay, buddy? The boy looked up at him, eyes wide and bright. I'm not a buddy, he said with a pout. I'm Liam. Aiden froze. Scarlett smiled faintly from behind. That's Liam, she confirmed. Jake's the one in red. And Sam's the one who never listens. Aiden felt something shift in his chest. Hi, Liam, he said again, softer now. I'm your dad. The boy tilted his head. Really? He nodded. Yeah. Really. Liam studied him for a long second, then without warning, wrapped his little arms around Aiden's neck. It wasn't planned. It wasn't rehearsed. It was just a moment, a child's instinct. And it undid him. Aiden stayed crouched there long after Liam ran ahead. Scarlett stood next to him now, her expression unreadable, but her arms were no longer crossed. She didn't speak, and neither did he. She didn't need to. He felt it in the silence between them, something beginning again. Back at the apartment, she invited him up. Not for a conversation, not for clarity, but because the boys wanted to show him their superhero wall, a messy collage of drawings and stickers and crayon chaos taped across their bedroom. He followed them inside, trying to absorb every moment, every detail, their voices, their routines, the way they each hugged her without even thinking. As he stood in the middle of their world, with toys scattered around his feet and giggles echoing from the hallway, Aiden realized something terrifying and beautiful at once. He didn't want to be a visitor in their lives. He wanted to stay. Aiden began showing up every day, though never uninvited. He texted Scarlett first, always asking, never assuming. And every time she responded with a simple yes or a short, polite reply, she left the door cracked open a little wider. The boys didn't question his sudden presence in their lives. Children didn't carry doubt the way adults did. They accepted him the way they accepted everything else in their world, with open curiosity and a kind of honesty that made Aiden feel like he was relearning life from the ground up. He learned that Liam liked dinosaurs, that Sam could name every planet in the solar system, and that Jake had a quiet streak but lit up when someone really listened. They called him Aiden at first, which cut deeper than he let show. He never corrected them. He didn't want to force anything. But one afternoon, after helping Sam build a rocket ship out of cardboard boxes in the living room, Jake sat beside him, leaned in, and said softly, "Are you gonna be my dad now?" The question hit him harder than any boardroom ambush ever had. He looked into Jake's serious blue eyes and answered the only way he could. "If you want me to be." Jake nodded and didn't say anything else, but later that evening, all three boys started calling him Dad. No ceremony. No warning. Just a shift, as simple and profound as the turning of a page. Scarlett watched it all quietly. She still kept her distance, not emotionally cold, but hesitant. She had spent years building walls around herself and her children, walls that protected them from a world she once believed could destroy them. Now that world was in her living room, making peanut butter sandwiches and fixing broken toy trucks with duct tape and determination. The next few weeks became a quiet transformation neither of them had expected. Aiden started showing up in the boys' lives regularly, not as a force or disruption, but as something steady. Scarlett, cautious as ever, kept her walls high at first. She didn't offer more than what was necessary, and Aiden didn't push. He knew she was waiting to see if he'd disappear again, if his presence was just another performance, another temporary flicker from a man who lived in a world built on control and distance. But this time, he had no exit plan. He showed up on Sundays for park visits. He brought art supplies and joined in finger painting sessions that left his $1,000 shoes covered in glitter and glue. He helped build blanket forts in the living room and learned quickly that Sam hated peas, Jake loved dinosaurs, and Liam insisted on being called Captain Lightning at least once a day. They didn't question him. They simply accepted him, like he'd always belonged, like they were just waiting for him to arrive. That acceptance broke him in the quietest, most powerful way. Scarlett watched it all with guarded eyes. She had never seen him like this before. The man she remembered from their past was polished, reserved, a little distant even in his affection. But this version, this man kneeling on the floor tying shoelaces, making up bedtime stories, staying after they fell asleep just to sit in the silence, was something else entirely. She didn't know what to do with that. Every part of her that had hardened to survive now felt exposed. Not because he demanded anything, but because he didn't. One evening, after the boys had finally fallen asleep, Scarlett walked into the kitchen to find Aiden quietly washing dishes. He hadn't asked, hadn't said a word, just rolled up his sleeves and started cleaning. The sight of him there, out of his element and yet somehow perfectly at home, caught her off guard. "You don't have to do that," she said, leaning against the doorway. He looked over his shoulder and offered a half-smile. "I know. But I want to." She crossed her arms, watching him for a moment. "You were always good at doing what you wanted." He turned off the faucet, drying his hands slowly before facing her fully. Not always. I was good at doing what I thought I was supposed to want. There's a difference. She didn't respond right away. Her guard was still up, but something in her chest was softening no matter how hard she fought it. I don't know how to trust this. Any of it. I know, he said gently. And I'm not asking you to trust me overnight. Just let me be here. Let me prove it. She looked down at the floor. You missed everything. Their first words, their first steps, birthdays, fevers, tantrums. You missed it all. He nodded. I know. And I'll never get that time back. But I'm here now. And if you let me, I won't miss another thing. Silence filled the space between them, but it wasn't cold. It was thick with something unsaid, something pulsing and alive. She wanted to believe him. Wanted to let him back in. But the risk terrified her. Because loving him again wouldn't be just her heart on the line, it would be 3 others too. Aiden stepped forward, not too close, not touching her, just enough to be heard fully. I'm not the same man you left. And maybe you're not the same woman either. But maybe that's okay. She looked up then, meeting his eyes. There was no performance in them. No ambition. No strategy. Just truth. I need time, she said finally. You can have all of it, he replied. And with that, she nodded. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was the first real step towards something they both thought had been lost. Something fragile, but worth trying for. As the days slipped into weeks, a new kind of rhythm began to form. It was uneven, uncertain, but it was real. Aiden became part of their everyday lives, not in sweeping gestures or dramatic declarations, but in small, deliberate ways. He started arriving early enough to help get the boys ready for school and stayed late enough to read bedtime stories, even when work demanded his attention elsewhere. He didn't try to buy their affection. He didn't overwhelm them with gifts or flashy distractions. He simply showed up, again and again, with quiet consistency, as if every moment was a chance to earn back a piece of the time he'd lost. Scarlett watched everything with a cautious heart. She wanted to believe that the man folding tiny socks on her couch and building Lego castles in the living room was the same Aiden she had once loved, but different in all the right ways. Yet the fear never fully left her. She'd spent 3 years doing everything alone, every tantrum, every doctor visit, every impossible decision. It had made her strong, but it had also built walls so high she couldn't always tell if they were protecting her or isolating her. One evening, as autumn crept in and the air turned crisp, Scarlett found herself sitting on the porch steps with a blanket over her shoulders, watching the boys chase fireflies in the fading light. Aiden sat beside her, elbows resting on his knees, his dress shirt rolled up at the sleeves, quiet and comfortable in the kind of domesticity he once would have found foreign. They talk about you all the time now, she said after a long silence. Even when you're not here. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. What do they say? She smiled softly. Liam says your voice sounds like Batman. Jake thinks you can fix anything. Sam asked me if you know how to fly a plane because, quote, he's rich and rich people do that stuff. Aiden laughed, but there was emotion behind it. They're incredible. They are, she said. And they're mine. Every breath, every scar, every inch of them. I didn't do it perfectly, but I did it with everything I had. He nodded, solemn now. I know. And I never doubted that. Even when I was angry, even when I didn't understand why you left. I knew you were doing what you believed was right. Scarlett's eyes glistened in the low light. I still don't know if it was. I just knew I couldn't raise them in your world. Or maybe, I didn't know how to. Aiden sat up straighter, his voice low but firm. Then let's make a new one. Not mine. Not yours. Ours. One they can grow up in without needing to unlearn who they are. She looked at him for a long time, her fingers tightening around the edges of her blanket. I don't want to raise them with someone who might walk away when it gets hard. I walked away from everything except you, he said. The only thing I ever regretted losing was what we had. And now, them. You. This. I'm not walking away. Not this time. It was the most vulnerable thing she'd ever heard him say. And it cracked something open inside her. That night, after the boys were asleep and the house was quiet, she handed him a folded piece of paper. On it were the boys' birth certificates. His name wasn't listed. Until now, it hadn't been. I'm ready for them to know who their father really is, she whispered. Legally. Fully. Not just in stories. Aiden looked down at the paper for a long time, overwhelmed by the weight of what it meant. This wasn't just about parenthood. It was about forgiveness. About trust. About being invited into a space that had once been completely closed to him. He looked back at her, his voice soft but certain. Thank you. Scarlett nodded, and for the first time, there was no hesitation in her eyes. They were building something now. Not starting over, because what they had before was gone. But what lay ahead was something new, something neither of them had imagined they'd get a second chance at. And it was worth every hard conversation, every scar, every silent night. The legal process moved slower than Aiden expected, but he didn't complain. Every meeting with the attorney, every signature, every background check, it all felt like steps towards something solid, something that couldn't be taken away from him this time. He sat through each one with a quiet kind of reverence, as though the paper trail finally matched the truth he had come to feel in his bones. He was their father, and not just in memory or biology, but in presence, in choice. In every morning he helped them get dressed and every night he stayed to read until they drifted to sleep. Scarlett watched the transformation quietly, still unsure how to label what was happening between them. They weren't a couple again, not officially. There was no kiss, no romantic declarations. But Aiden was in her home almost every day. He knew where the cereal was, which boy needed his blanket warmed in the dryer before bed, and which one still woke up with bad dreams. He folded laundry while she handled emails, learned how to make pancakes with smiley faces, and once even braided Scarlett's hair in the early morning chaos when one of the boys asked, "Why doesn't mommy get a turn too?" One evening, after a long day, the boys were tucked in early, and a rare quiet settled over the house. Aiden was on the porch again, this time with a notebook open in his lap. Scarlett walked out holding 2 mugs of tea, one of which she handed him without a word. He took it, surprised at the gesture, and glanced at her with a tired but grateful expression. "What's that?" she asked, nodding toward the notebook. He hesitated before answering. "Names. Names. For the trust fund I'm setting up. Not just for them. For others like them. Kids raised by strong mothers who did everything alone." Scarlett didn't reply at first. She sipped her tea and stared out at the quiet street. "I never wanted your money," she said eventually, softly. "I know," he said. "That's why I want to give it." She looked over at him then, and there was a silence that passed between them, the kind filled with meaning but not yet resolution. She still didn't know what to do with all of it, with how present he had become, how gentle, how different. She wanted to believe this wasn't temporary, that it wasn't some guilt-fueled overcorrection. But a voice deep inside her still warned her to be careful. "Why are you really here, Aiden?" she asked suddenly. "Is it just the kids?" He didn't answer right away. He closed the notebook, set it aside, and turned to face her completely. "No," he said. "It started with them. But it's not just them. It's you too." Scarlett exhaled slowly, her heart pounding in a way that felt both old and unfamiliar. "I don't know if I can go through losing you again," she admitted. "If I let this go too far and it falls apart, it won't just hurt me. It'll hurt them too." "I'm not asking you to leap," he said. "Just to walk beside me." And if I can't? Then I'll keep walking anyway. With or without the title, or the label, or anything else. I'll be here. Because this is where I should have been all along. Her throat tightened. He wasn't trying to win her. He wasn't even trying to persuade her. He was just telling the truth. That night, she didn't ask him to leave. And when he stayed, sleeping on the couch, wrapped in one of the boys' superhero blankets, it wasn't because he had to, or because he insisted. It was because, slowly, quietly, he was becoming home. Winter came softly that year, bringing early darkness and quiet mornings layered in frost. The boys were old enough now to notice the change in the air, to be excited about coats and gloves and the promise of snow. Scarlett found herself watching them more than usual, the way they ran into Aiden's arms the moment he stepped through the door, the way they leaned on him like they had always known he would be there. Sometimes it still caught her off guard, how natural it looked, how simple. But there was nothing simple about what it took to get there. She had built this life brick by brick with her bare hands, and somehow, without warning, Aiden had walked back into it and become a part of the foundation. One evening, close to the holidays, the house was buzzing with energy. The boys were helping decorate a small tree Scarlett had picked up earlier that week, each of them arguing over who got to hang which ornament. Aiden sat on the floor between them, smiling through the chaos, untangling a string of lights that had no intention of cooperating. Scarlett stood in the doorway with a mug in her hands, watching the scene, letting herself feel the weight and warmth of it. Later, after the boys were finally asleep and the house had fallen into that rare kind of calm that only came after a full, happy day, Aiden found her sitting on the edge of the bed she used to sleep in alone. She didn't speak when he walked in. She just looked at him, her eyes soft but guarded, still asking a question he hadn't answered completely. He crossed the room and sat beside her, close enough to feel the heat from her skin but not close enough to touch. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "But I think I should." She looked over at him, waiting. "I didn't come back to fix the past," he said. "I can't. I lost too much time, and I'll never get it back. But I can be here now. And I want to be, for you, for them, in whatever way you'll let me. No pressure. No timelines. Just truth." Scarlett stared at her hands for a long moment before speaking. "You know, I used to dream about this. About you coming back. But in the dream, I was angry. I yelled. I made you earn it." He smiled gently. "That sounds fair. But now that you're here," she continued, "all I feel is tired. Tired of holding everything on my own. Tired of being afraid to need someone." "You don't have to be afraid," he said. "Needing someone doesn't make you weak. It makes me vulnerable." "Then be vulnerable," he said quietly. "With me." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the man she had once run from but the man who had returned and stayed. The man who braided hair with clumsy fingers, who read bedtime stories with too much expression, who kissed skinned knees and tied tiny shoes without ever expecting applause. The man who had changed, not because she asked him to, but because life had demanded it of him and he had chosen to grow. She reached out then, her hand resting gently on his. "I don't want to do this alone anymore," she whispered. "You never have to again." They didn't kiss. Not that night. It wasn't about that. It was about the way her head rested on his shoulder moments later. The way his hand found hers and didn't let go. The way the silence between them wasn't silence anymore, but peace. Weeks passed. The paperwork was finalized. Aiden's name was written, legally and forever, beside theirs. He moved into a small house 2 blocks away, giving Scarlett space, but never too much. They co-parented with ease, with warmth, with laughter. And slowly, the love that had once been buried under years of pain and distance began to take root again, real this time, stronger because of everything it had survived. On a quiet Sunday morning, as snow fell outside and the boys curled up between them on the couch with cartoons playing low on the screen, Scarlett looked at Aiden and saw not the man he had been or the mistakes he'd made. She saw the man who stayed. The man who showed up. The man who, against every odd and after every storm, had come home. To me, the ending of this story isn't just a resolution, it's a quiet triumph of love earned, not assumed. It's about two people who were torn apart by fear and silence but found their way back through presence, growth, and patience. What makes this ending powerful is not that everything turns out perfectly, but that the characters choose each other again, with their scars, their history, and all the weight of what they've been through. Aiden doesn't return as a savior. He comes back as a man willing to unlearn his old self, to show up every day not with grand promises, but with quiet consistency. And Scarlett doesn't forgive easily, she protects her children, holds her boundaries, and only opens her heart again when she truly sees he's changed. Their reunion feels earned because it's not driven by nostalgia or fantasy, but by who they've become apart and who they're willing to be together. What I love most is how the story honors healing, not just as an idea, but as a lived, daily experience. The characters don't pretend the past didn't hurt. They acknowledge it, and they build something better because of it. In a world full of quick fixes and surface-level redemption arcs, this ending feels rare. It's gentle. It's grounded. And that's what makes it unforgettable.